So what I'm going to have you do, I'm going to go over these criteria that we use to evaluate SEMs. And then I'm going to let you loose in my seedlings. And I want you to kind of, I've marked some of the groups, or I picked out what I think are the distinctive ones. I want you to either agree or disagree. And there are some groups over there where I haven't marked anything. And I want you to be the ones that tell me, that's the one you should be picking, Kevin. So I want to do, so when we're going through this exercise here, keep all these things in your mind, okay? So the rosette is the most important part, of course, in the SEM. And when we were doing the evaluation, we counted that as about 75% of the total of how we considered a SEM should be evaluated. If the rosette wasn't pretty, who cares if it grew beautifully or it had fairly interesting flowers? If it made ugly rosettes, we can throw that one over the fence. And what we were looking for is distinction, and they can be distinct by any one of these criteria. They can be shape distinctive ones, certainly things like oddity or weirdo. Oddity has tubular leaves, weirdo just kind of grows any which way. Or very rounded leaves, or like Griggs Surprise has very rounded leaves. All those things would be things that would make a plant unique in shape. There are other ways too. I mean, it could be very incurved rosettes, very upgrowing, like a water lily. All those things are desirable. The number and width of the leaves is another criteria that could differ. I tend to like fat leaves and not so many in a rosette. That's my preference. Other people like just the opposite. Lots of little leaves to make a very dense clump. But I think both are effective and both can be distinctive.
So when you were evaluating, you were counting every leaf?
Just kind of getting general ideas. Does it have a lot of leaves? Does it have few leaves?
Okay. All right.
And you'll see, like an Eric, I wasn't going to count all the leaves on an arachnoideum. There was a lot of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but when we did the comparisons, yes, we actually had with a little one of those count the leaves to make sure we were dealing with the same number of leaves.
Oh, crazy.
When we were evaluating a new cultivar, no.
Right.
But when we were trying to tell that Peter Mitchell's arachnoideum variety tomentosum was the same as what we were selling, yes, we went to that point. I know.
Crazy scientist.
Yeah. Now, Mrs. Crane said she had lots of money, so we had the best lunch during these days. She had this dining room that was not quite as big as a football field, but nearly. And we entered this one door, and it looked like there were no other doors to the room. And she would ring this little bell, and suddenly one of the walls would open up, and all the servants would come flying in with our meals.
Those were the good old days. How long did this process take you?
3 years.
Bravo.
But we learned a lot. I think that was important. But anyway, we also got a very good meal. She had quite a good cook. And Mrs. Crane also liked to imbibe. And so she had one of the servants actually followed her around, filling her glass, keeping it full constantly. So her evaluations tended to get more and more elaborate and interesting as the afternoon transpired. And there were some intangibles that we couldn't put in words, and that was just kind of the overall beauty of, does this thing all these different characters work together? I mean, sometimes you might have had something that was unusual for one of these facets, but the whole thing wasn't pretty. And so this is the overall beauty of it. And then the health of the plant. One of the things, in New England, this wasn't much of a problem. We had a lot of snow in New England, and snow is a really good cover for SEMs. It actually keeps them dry. And so they're very happy all winter. They think they're in the Alps. They aren't, but they think they're there. Here I find the winter is much more of a problem, and the Brits had the same problem too. They do not like this drizzle. I noticed the week that we had the freezing fog, all my stems in that front bed just deteriorated incredibly. The ones in the yard, not so much. But the ones in that bed out there, for whatever reason, maybe it's more shade, so the freezing fog affected them more. So in the springtime, what I look for now, I want a plant where I see not a lot of dead leaves at the bottom of that rosette. I want it to look healthy from day one, staring back at me.
So what types are you finding tend to have that problem more? Like lilac queen and lilac thyme, I've had a real, I don't care what I do with them, those by springtime and getting into better weather, they're just looking pitiful.
Lavender and lace.
Lavender and old lace,
Yeah.
that's another one.
And almost all the ones from the Caucasus, Turkey, the Balkans tend to look bad. Erythraeum, Ciliosum, they tend to look bad. The ones that actually I'm surprised look very good are the ones from Spain.
Oh.
They came through the winter better than anything of those ones. I was afraid I was going to lose every one of those, and every one looked great coming through the winter. So, in my mind, I said, ooh, might be a choice of a parent. Now that's the other thing when you're evaluating this list. You're also, as a hybridizer, you're thinking, what other things now what are the most spectacular and beautiful and perfect plants that I can use in my crosses too. So that's the other thing we have to have in the back of our mind as a hybridizer. Another characteristic, we usually gave this about 20 points, is how the clump looked. And we actually had fairly varied opinions in our group as to the kinds of clumps that people liked. Some people liked these very compacted clumps where they grow right on top of each other. Others liked it where the stolons were a little bit longer and spread out. And some of them only liked the Euphyllia types that were just mangled right on top of each other. And I think each can be beautiful. I like a clump such that the stolons are long enough so that the offsets can form a full-size rosette away from the parent. I think that's an important characteristic. I don't like the stolons too long. Ozetiense and some of those like that just crawl forever, and I think that's not attractive.
Ends up looking messy.
Yes. The arachnoideum types, they have short stolons, but they also have small rosettes. So that works. They make a very pretty clump. When the plant that blooms in the clump blooms, it doesn't leave a really big hole. That's the other thing I do not like. When they bloom and leave a big hole, it's disgusting. If they can not do that, I would be a happy camper. Some people didn't like them to bloom at all. The calcareums tend to not bloom at all. You have to have a clump generally 6 to 8 years in one spot before it will try to bloom. In fact, I told Helen I was doing crosses with calcareum, and she says, Kevin, it doesn't bloom. You can't be doing crosses with calcareum. And then one year I got this box with a bag of the flower of calcareum. Okay, you were right. but she always took her offsets off. She never let them really clump up into clumps.
My pink pearl has never bloomed.
Yeah.
And it's really
been there
getting
for a
lot
while.
of years, yeah.
When they do bloom, however, as a hybridizer, they're wonderful because they have the most pretty pollen and just tons of it. And so when I was starting crossing, most of the stems had just kind of feeble little bits of pollen. These guys produced a ton. And so when you made crosses, it was easy. You could spread that pollen all around the yard and still have plenty to go. The flower was the most controversial thing. When we were doing the comparisons, we've often found that a plant that had looked virtually identical to the type plant from England, suddenly when it flowered, oh my God, it's not the same at all. The one from England has yellow flowers and mine has red. And so we had to throw out everything that we thought was identical in the U.S., even though the rosette was the same and every other character looked to be almost identical. we ended up starting from scratch.
Oh, that boggles my
I
mind.
know.
Yeah. You know, I like when one does bloom, I like it not to be too tall. A lot of them go flying over, and that's not a good thing. The Arachnoideums have their nice short bloom stalks, and they have pretty red flowers or white flowers. They're nice. I like that a lot. As I said, the frequency of the bloom, some people like that. And if you have a pretty Arachnoideum with red flowers, that's a good thing. If you have something that has a stalk that goes 2 feet tall, like Lady Kelly does, and has kind of mungy rose flowers, not so good. But even that's the characteristic of the thing. And as I mentioned, the last characteristic is distinction. Can I tell that scent from any other scent? It's not ward's number 56. It's it's going to be something that's really unique. So when I was going through in the good old days when I was crossing, there were only 400 varieties of scents available in the world. Not many. In fact, Paulie Bishop actually had a piece of every scent that was ever on the market at that time in her garden. And so when I started my crossing, she literally had them all. And so anything that appeared to be unique, we knew right away, oh, that's different than any one of the 400 out here.
And you knew where you could find it too.
That's right. That's right. So, anyway, that's kind of the mental processes that we go over. When I was hybridizing and putting things on the market, we also had Bill Nixon and Mrs. Crane and some of the others would come to my house to look at my seedlings each season. So they would come at the optimal time of year in Massachusetts to look at all the seedlings, and they would do this to the various ones that I was considering naming, and then I would ship them to Helen, and then she would go like this. Sometimes she didn't like my names.
There's some great stories behind
Yeah, I'll tell a few of those. And so each year we would go through this process. So they would also be grown in Massachusetts and in Oregon, which is quite different climate, soil types. And also Helen had an idea of the market, which is, as a hybridizer, I don't think that much about. But she knew what would sell. And I think that's an important thing too, to have a person know, oh yeah, if I have an 8-inch red, that's going to sell. I remember when she got Jungle Shadows for the first time in a box, and she called me up that day. She says, "How many more do you have like that?" And so that's the kind of endorsement you like as a hybridizer. But she was like, "This is the kind of things that I could sell ad nauseum, because there's just all kinds of stuff there." So, and it was at that time it was completely unique compared to anything else we had ever seen. Okay.
So Kevin, what is the limit on color? Why have we not seen orange scent?
I just think it's probably we haven't, most of the hybridizing, quote unquote, has really not been hybridizing.
It's just
Random.
Yeah.
It's random, and I think if you do it meaningfully, like you'll see in this group here, there are fewer pigs. And you get fewer pigs. It is kind of a numbers game. You want to grow lots. Scrocky grew 20 to 40,000 seedlings every year.
Wow.
But he did not make a single cross. He just went out there and gathered all the seed, put it in a shoebox, and planted it. But you grow 40,000. It's like chimps writing the great American novel. If you put enough chimps in a room with enough typewriters, they'll write the great novel. And that's how essentially is Ed's approach to hybridizing. If you grow enough of them, you have enough chimps, you're going to get a good one every now and then. So out of 40,000, you could put 4 or 5 on the market, which to me is not. And so I would But I would do careful crosses and rate 400 and get the same number on the market. So I think it was an easier way for me. I like my way better.
Were you the only one that was doing controlled crosses, or
About. Yeah.
So Ed the people that weren't doing controlled crossings wouldn't know what the parentage was.
No idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
He didn't want to know, though. He really did. I mean, in fact, he came east one time to actually learn how to do it. And he said, "Oh, this is too much fuss. there isn't."
not when you could throw it in a shoe?
That's right.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, so even Bill Nixon, I was surprised, because he was trained as a geneticist.
Yeah.
And he did it like 1 or 2 years, and he says, "Oh, Kevin, I can't imagine you done it all these years, because this is the worst damn thing I've ever done."
So we should have a greater appreciation for what you're doing.
Well, I don't know about that, but it's like
Yeah, but
it's
that's
easier in
interesting.
Oregon too, that I find, because you can cover things easily here with just a paper bag,
Oh,
whereas in New England we had a thunder shower every other day, and so.
Right.
And we're dry in the summer when the seeds are.
That's right. Yes, it's a
all
good
of that
climate
is
for
going
doing
on.
this.
Blooming.